The laughter started before he even cut the engine. It rolled through the open bay doors of the Malibu estate like something rehearsed, bright and sharp, and entirely comfortable with itself. The way laughter is when the people producing it have never once had to wonder whether they belonged somewhere. The property sat above the Pacific Coast Highway on a ridge of scrub and imported stone, a glass and steel structure that a certain kind of magazine described as an architectural statement. On the terraced hillside below the main house, a garage, the size of a municipal building, stood with its doors thrown wide. Interior lights burning like the inside of a cathedral. The machines inside arranged with the reverence of objects that had been given more meaning than they could reasonably hold. There were 11 vehicles in the collection. A black Bugatti Chiron, a Lamborghini Huracan finished in a blue so deep it looked wet, a McLaren Senna that had never touched a public road, a Rolls-Royce Phantom in silver over tan, 2 Ferraris, one red, one white, parked at angles that suggested they had been chosen for visual balance rather than convenience. The remaining 5 occupied the rear of the space in graduated sizes, each one representing a category of expenditure that most people never entered. Taken together, the collection was worth somewhere between $42 and $47 million, depending on the market and the mood of the appraiser. Every guest at the showcase that evening understood this. Several had helped finance it. The event was called a private preview. Evelyn Vaughn organized 2 or 3 of them each year, selective gatherings of investors, partners, and the carefully cultivated adjacencies of both, held at the Malibu property, because the property itself was an argument. Everything about the setting communicated the same essential point. The future of performance automotive technology was being built here by this company, under this leadership, and the people standing in this garage were the ones who would benefit most from understanding that early. Vaughn Velocity had spent 9 years becoming the most talked-about name in performance vehicle engineering. Not the largest, not the most profitable, but the most discussed, which in certain circles amounted to the same thing. Evelyn had cultivated that reputation with the precision of someone who understood that perception properly managed preceded reality and sometimes substituted for it entirely. She was 37 years old, with dark hair pulled back at the nape of her neck and a face that conveyed authority so consistently that most people forgot to wonder whether she was comfortable. She wore charcoal tonight tailored to severity and moved through her own party with the measured attention of someone conducting an audit. The conversation she was hosting in the center of the garage had been going well. Damian Cross, a private equity figure with more capital than patience and a reputation for treating other people's discomfort as a form of entertainment, had been describing his most recent acquisition to a small audience of people who were listening with the particular intensity of those calculating whether they should have done the same thing. He was saying something about market timing when the tow truck appeared at the far end of the driveway. It was old, a working vehicle, not a collector's piece painted in the faded green of a company that had probably operated for decades without anyone thinking to refresh the paint. It moved with the deliberate care of heavy machinery, and behind it, attached by a steel cable to the truck's rear hook, came the Mustang. 1967. Fastback configuration. The original Acapulco blue had long since oxidized into something closer to gray patchy in places where the clear coat had given up entirely. The chrome trim on the headlights was flaking. There was rust at the lower corners of the rear quarter panels, not catastrophic but visible, the kind of rust that accumulates over decades of honest weather rather than negligence. The interior, glimpsed through the driver's window, as the truck eased the car through the garage entrance, appeared to have been reupholstered at some point, with materials that were functional rather than aspirational. The conversation in the garage did not stop immediately. It tapered. One person glanced toward the doors, then another. Then the room's attention shifted as a whole, the way attention does when something sufficiently incongruous has entered a space, and the silence that followed lasted perhaps 4 seconds before Damian Cross laughed. It was a real laugh, not performed, not pointed, but genuinely amused, the way a person laughs when something unexpected has confirmed a suspicion they already held about the world and how it tends to arrange itself. "Did someone's garage get the wrong address?" he said. A few people around him laughed too. Not everyone, but enough to establish a register. The tow truck stopped. The cable went slack, and the driver's door of the Mustang opened. Noah Carter climbed out with the unhurried movement of a man who had stopped managing other people's impressions of him some years ago and found the savings in energy to be considerable. He was 39, broad across the shoulders, with hands that told a particular story. The knuckles slightly thickened the palms, marked with the fine tracery of old burns and older cuts. The kind of hands that had spent 20 years in the mechanical interior of things that most people only interacted with from the outside. He was wearing a denim work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow and canvas pants that were clean but clearly lived in. His boots were steel-toed. His hair was dark and needed cutting. He wore none of this as a statement. He walked to the passenger door and opened it, and Emma Carter climbed out with the careful seriousness of a 9-year-old who was paying attention to everything. She had her father's dark eyes, and her mother's way of going still when she was thinking, and she was carrying a stuffed bear that had been washed so many times its expression had softened into something beatific. She took her father's hand without looking up at him, and looked instead at the cars, working through them with methodical attention. "Those are nice," she said quietly. "They're okay," Noah said. Lucas Reed was standing near the rear wall when the Mustang came in, and he was the only person in the room who did not laugh. He was Vaughn Velocity's chief engineering officer, 41, with the slightly abstracted air of someone whose mind was always working at a problem one layer deeper than the current conversation. He had spent his career among engines the way other people spent theirs among languages, with a facility that had eventually become something closer to instinct. He looked at the Mustang the way he looked at anything mechanical, not at the surface, but at what the surface was doing and whether it was lying. The Mustang's hood was not quite level. The gap between the hood and the front fenders on the driver's side was a millimeter narrower than the passenger's side, which meant the engine was pulling fractionally, or that something beneath the hood was shaped differently than the standard configuration expected. He filed this away without mentioning it. Evelyn crossed the garage toward Noah with the gait of someone who had decided to manage a situation before it managed itself. She stopped in front of the car and looked at it with an expression that was not quite contempt. Contempt would have required acknowledgement, and Evelyn had learned early that acknowledgement was a form of concession. What her face showed instead was the blankness of someone processing information they had already decided was irrelevant. "Mr. Carter," she said. "Miss Vaughn." She looked from him to the car and back. "I have to ask what you're expecting to accomplish here tonight." Noah put his hand on the hood of the Mustang. Not possessively, the gesture was more like a check-in, the way you touch a shoulder of someone you've been traveling with. "I was told there'd be a technical audience." "There is. For Vaughn Velocity's current development pipeline." "I know." He looked at her steadily. "I designed part of it." The room did not go entirely silent, but it thinned. Conversations dropped a register. Damian Cross turned from the Ferrari he had been examining and looked at Noah with the specific attention of a man who has just been told something that offends him slightly but entertains him more. "You designed part of it," Damian repeated, tasting the claim. He gestured at the collection around them, the gleaming, purpose-built, exquisitely marketed machines that represented the current state of the art. "And this is what you arrived in." Noah looked at him with an expression that was not hostile. It was simply patient, the patience of someone who has had a version of this conversation before and knows how it ends. "This is what I drove here in," he said. "There's a difference." Damian waited for elaboration. Noah did not provide it. Instead, he walked to the front of the Mustang, lifted the hood, and propped it with the support rod that had been installed precisely for this purpose at a height that suggested someone had thought carefully about the angle at which the engine would be visible from a standing position. Lucas walked over before anyone else moved. What he saw inside the engine compartment of a 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback was not the 428 cubic inch unit that the car had come with from the factory or any of the aftermarket variations that the restoration community cycled through in predictable rotation. What he saw was something he did not have an immediate category for. The block was custom clearly and at a level of machining precision that was not the product of a small garage operation. The intake manifold was unlike anything in current production. The exhaust routing had been designed to accommodate a heat recovery system that Lucas recognized from a theoretical paper he had read 3 years ago, a paper that had been filed by a small engineering firm and then disappeared from accessible literature before he could locate a follow-up. He looked at this for a long moment without speaking. Then he looked at Noah. "Where did you build this?" he asked. "My garage," Noah said. 12 years. Lucas nodded once slowly with the manner of a man accepting a piece of information that has just reorganized a portion of his understanding of the world. "I'd like to hear it run," he said. Evelyn heard this from 6 feet away and said nothing. She was watching Noah with an expression that had shifted, not softened, but altered in the particular way that expressions alter when something long suppressed has been stimulated unexpectedly. Noah reached through the driver's window and retrieved the key from the ignition. He held it for a moment, the way you hold something you have been holding for a very long time and know the weight of completely. "I'll need about 10 feet of clearance," he said. Damian Cross positioned himself near the front bumper of the Rolls-Royce Phantom with the posture of a man settling in for something that had been arranged for his amusement. He had his phone out, not recording yet, but ready to begin recording when the moment warranted it. Tell you what he said to no one in particular and everyone available. If that thing starts, I'll buy it. Put it in my dining room. Conversation piece. He smiled at the small audience that had assembled around the car. I'll pay whatever the scrap value comes to. Several people laughed. Emma Carter, standing beside her father with her bear under one arm, looked at Damian with an expression that was not angry, but was paying very careful attention. Our car isn't scrap, she said. Damian glanced down at her with the benevolent dismissiveness that some adults deploy toward children who have said something inconveniently accurate. That's sweet, he said. Emma looked at the car, then at her father. Is he going to feel stupid? She asked quietly. Probably, Noah said. He put his hand briefly on top of her head. Don't make a big deal of it when he does. She considered this with the seriousness it deserved, and nodded. Noah opened the driver's door and got in. He did not close it behind him. He sat in the reupholstered bucket seat. The original driver's seat had been rebuilt. Lucas noted with lateral support modifications that were consistent with high-performance driving applications, and he reached for the ignition. The key went in with a precise click that was the first audible evidence of tolerances that did not belong in a 1967 road car. Noah looked through the windshield at the garage interior, at the assembled collection, at the assembled people, at his daughter, standing in front of them all with her bear and her absolute confidence. Then he turned the key. The engine did not cough. It did not hesitate. It did not produce the exploratory rumble of a cold start working its way toward operating temperature. It came alive, the way something comes alive when it has been built correctly from the beginning, with completeness, with a sound that had layers in it, not a single register, but multiple registers woven together, the lowest of them arriving, not through the air, but through the floor, through the concrete, through the soles of whatever you happened to be wearing. Evelyn Vaughn went very still. The sound was not loud. That was perhaps the most disorienting thing about it. It was powerful in the way that deep water is powerful without violence or announcement. The garage held it and reflected it back, and in that reflection it was possible to hear something that most of the people present could not name because they had only encountered it once in a different context in a recording from a prototype test session that had been conducted 11 years ago in a facility outside Phoenix, before the project was restructured and the original engineering team was dispersed. Evelyn had attended that test session. She had been 26 years old, still working inside her father's firm, still learning the contours of a world she intended to inherit and reshape. She had stood in a bay in Phoenix and heard a sound that she had spent 11 years trying to reproduce. The company she built had been oriented around that reproduction. Its entire research pipeline was a long, expensive, partially successful attempt to recover something that had been understood once and then lost. The sound in the garage was the same sound. Not similar, not an approximation, the same. Lucas was already at the front of the car, crouching beside the open hood, holding a small diagnostic device he had retrieved from the workbench along the rear wall. The device was reading. He watched the numbers come in, and the process of watching them arrive created an expression on his face that was not possible to produce artificially, the expression of a person encountering confirmation of something they had believed was impossible and had not let themselves fully believe. He straightened. He looked at Noah through the windshield. Noah cut the engine. The garage went quiet in a specific way, not the quiet of before the car started, but the quiet of after, which is always different, always carries the shape of what has just occurred inside it. Run it again, Lucas said. Noah ran it again. Damian Cross's phone was no longer raised. The conversation that followed did not happen in front of an audience. Lucas asked Evelyn to clear the garage, which was not a request she was accustomed to receiving from her own employees, and which she honored after a pause long enough to indicate that she was doing so by choice rather than compliance. The guests moved to the terrace. Emma was settled in a chair near the workbench with a glass of water and her bear and a clear sight line to her father, which was the only arrangement she would accept. Noah opened the car fully. The Mustang's body was original or close enough to original that the modifications were invisible at a glance, which was the point. Beneath it was something else entirely. The drivetrain was custom from the block to the differential. The hybrid mechanical system was unlike any production architecture, because it had not been derived from any production architecture. It had been derived from first principles, from a theoretical framework that Noah had developed over 7 years of evenings and weekends, and the particular mental space that opens up when a person has accepted that they are working on something for reasons other than money. He explained it the way he explained things plainly, with the assumption that the person he was talking to was capable of following the logic if the logic was presented accurately. Lucas followed it. Evelyn followed it, and said nothing, which was a different kind of following. The efficiency curve, Lucas said after 20 minutes of explanation. The heat recovery integration. This is what the Phoenix prototype was reaching for. The Phoenix prototype was reaching for it, Noah said. This is it. Evelyn looked at him across the hood of the car. The Phoenix project was shut down, she said. The engineering team was dissolved. The intellectual property was acquired. The intellectual property was acquired, Noah agreed. My name was removed from the filing. The acquisition was structured so that the original contributor couldn't be identified in the public record. He said this without heat, the way you state a fact you have had time to absorb. I know all of that. I was there. Lucas pulled up his laptop on the workbench. He opened the company's internal development archive files that went back to before Vaughn Velocity existed under its current name, files inherited through acquisition that no one had looked at in years because the originating project was considered a historical dead end. He searched for the Phoenix prototype documentation. He found it in 40 seconds. The original project lead was listed as an external consultant whose name had been redacted in the current archive. But the file metadata, which had not been cleaned, contained an author tag from the original document creation. The tag read N. Carter. Lucas looked at the screen for a moment. Then he looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at Noah. I've spent 9 years trying to make this work, she said. Her voice was the same controlled level, but something underneath it had shifted in the way that foundations shift imperceptibly to most instruments. I know, Noah said. I've been watching. You could have come to us. You weren't looking for me. You were looking for the design. Those aren't the same thing. He closed the panel over the engine with the care of someone handling something that belongs to them. The design without the understanding of why it works is a machine that runs inconsistently. You've seen that. I built a version that runs the way it was always supposed to run in a car that nobody looked twice at, and I kept it for 11 years. Emma had gotten down from the chair at some point and was standing beside her father close enough to touch his arm. She was looking at Evelyn with the unguarded directness of a child who has not yet learned to filter perception through courtesy. Why did you take it? She asked. No one in the garage spoke. Evelyn looked at the girl for a long moment. I didn't make that decision, she said finally. But you kept it, Emma said. Noah put his hand on his daughter's shoulder, not as a correction, but as an acknowledgement. She leaned slightly into him and kept looking at Evelyn. She's right, Noah said quietly. Keeping it as a decision, too. The offer came the following morning, made by phone, before the drive back from Malibu had been completed, which told Noah something about how the night had landed. Evelyn's number appeared on his screen at 6:43, before the sun had fully cleared the hills above the highway. He answered, $5 million, she said, for the Mustang and full rights to the Titangent X architecture. He said no. She said $10 million. He said no again with the same tone he used the first time, which was not a negotiating tone. It was the tone of someone who had already had this conversation internally and was simply reporting the conclusion. Emma was asleep in the passenger seat, turned toward the window with the complete unconsciousness of a child who trusts that the world will manage itself while she is not watching it. Noah drove with one hand on the wheel and looked at the road. The Pacific was visible in flashes between the hills, catching the early light. Damian Cross was not satisfied with the answer that Noah Carter had refused $10 million. He was the kind of man who filed away the places where other people's decisions did not conform to his understanding of how people worked, and he found that he could. Over the following days, he made inquiries, which was a word that covered a range of activities, including phone calls to mutual contacts. A brief engagement with a research service he kept on retainer for situations of this kind, and a conversation with his assistant that resulted in a folder of assembled information being on his desk by Thursday morning. The folder told a story he recognized. Emma Carter had been diagnosed 14 months earlier with a condition that required ongoing treatment. The treatment was expensive. Noah's income, freelance contract work, small engine jobs, the occasional consulting call that had not materialized into anything consistent was not expensive. The gap between these two facts was being managed by a combination of the savings account he had held since his working years inside the industry, a payment plan, arranged with the clinic, and a discipline about household expenditure that would have registered to most people as poverty and that Noah experienced as arithmetic. Damien absorbed this information with the interest of someone who has just been given a key to a lock he could not previously open. He went to Evelyn with it not as a kindness, but as intelligence. If Noah needed money for his daughter's treatment, then Noah's refusal was not principled, it was staged. The man was holding out for a better offer, or for the satisfaction of being pursued. Evelyn listened to this analysis. She said she would consider it. She did not say what she was considering, which was the call she made to Noah that evening after Damien had left her office. Cross looked into your daughter, she said, without preamble, when he answered. Noah was quiet for a moment. I know. He thinks it means you'll sell eventually. He's wrong. I told him that. She paused. I want you to hear me say it. He was in the kitchen of the house he rented in a neighborhood that was working its way slowly from affordable to merely expensive. Emma was doing homework at the table, pencil moving, not looking up. He turned toward the window. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Because I was the one who bought the Phoenix project, Evelyn said. And I've had long enough to know what that means. A pause. The name removal that wasn't my decision, but I knew the acquisition happened. I knew what I was getting, and I didn't ask how it was obtained. You have a right to know that I know that. Noah looked at his daughter. She had stopped writing and was watching him with the sideways attention children deploy when they are not pretending to listen. What do you want from this? He asked Evelyn. She was quiet for long enough that the quality of the silence changed. Honestly, she said, I want it to work. The real version. The one that runs the way it's supposed to run. I've spent 9 years on an approximation. Another pause. I think I'd like to understand what I've actually been building toward. That's a more honest answer than I expected. I've been finding honesty more productive lately, she said. It's been a difficult adjustment. Emma had given up pretending to do homework and was watching him openly. He looked at her. She raised her eyebrows with the eloquence of a 9-year-old who has drawn her own conclusions and is waiting to see whether the adult in the room will reach them too. He turned back to the window. I'll come to the facility, he said. Lucas Reed had spent his career in service of a specific idea that the internal combustion engine properly understood was still capable of producing something that had not yet been seen. He had pursued this idea through the industry with the single-mindedness of a person whose passion and vocation happened to occupy the same space, which was either a profound gift or a source of the particular loneliness that comes from caring about something more than the institutions that employ you to care about it. He had believed in Vaughn Velocity because Evelyn Vaughn had convinced him at the beginning that she believed in it too. He had stayed because the work was real, even when the leadership's motivations were complicated, and because walking away from real work for cleaner reasons was a trade he had never been able to make. When Noah came to the facility, Lucas showed him around without being asked to, and without performing enthusiasm, because the enthusiasm was genuine, and he had long since stopped disguising genuine things. They spent 4 hours together on the first day. Noah did not bring the Mustang. He brought a notebook, physical spiral-bound, filled with the kind of documentation that does not originate from a software suite, but from the accumulated margin notes of years of direct engagement with a problem. Lucas looked at the notebook, the way he had looked at the engine in Malibu, not at the surface, but at what the surface was doing. What the notebook revealed over the course of 4 hours was not merely the technical specifications of the Tangent X architecture. It revealed the logic of it, the sequence of problems and solutions that had produced the architecture, the dead ends that had been followed, and abandoned the specific insight about heat recovery integration that had arrived not from a calculation, but from an experiment that had failed in an informative way. The notebook was the mind of the engine, laid out in handwriting that was small and very precise. Lucas looked up from the notebook at one point and said, "We've been trying to reverse engineer the output. We didn't have the input." "No," Noah said. "You had the output without understanding why the output existed. Can you teach it?" Noah looked at him with the consideration of someone who has been asked this before internally and has arrived at a conditional answer. "I can teach the principles," he said. "I can't teach the 11 years. On the third day, Evelyn was present for the working session. She sat at the far end of the table and listened with the quality of attention she deployed when she had decided that listening was the most productive thing she could do, which was not often, and which when it occurred tended to produce results that her habitual mode did not. She did not interrupt. She did not offer assessments. At one point, Noah described a specific failure in the original Phoenix test series, a failure that had been logged in the archive as an equipment fault incorrectly, and Evelyn said without looking up from the diagram she was studying, "That's why the third iteration underperformed." Noah looked at her. "I couldn't figure out why," she said. "For 4 years. You were measuring the wrong variable," he said. "I know that now." She looked up from the diagram. What would you have needed then? To stay. The question was not quite about the past. Noah recognized this and answered accordingly. My name on the work, he said. That's all. Evelyn looked at the table for a moment. Then she nodded once in the specific way of someone accepting a terms that cost them something they should have offered freely and had not. The drag race was not planned. It emerged from a conversation about verification. Lucas's argument was that no institutional investor would credit the performance claims without empirical demonstration, and that the demonstration could not occur on a closed test of track without advanced scheduling. That would create a delay none of them could afford given the pending shareholder meeting. One of the junior engineers said with the casual reasonableness of someone proposing the obvious that there was a closed industrial strip on the coast road used for permitted vehicle testing, that it was available on a given Saturday morning, and that the Bugatti Chiron from Evelyn's collection was currently in the facility for a brake service inspection. The Chiron was the fastest production car in the facility. It was the appropriate benchmark. Evelyn arrived on Saturday. In a vehicle she did not own, a low-slung dark car she drove herself, which was unusual enough to register. Noah arrived in the Mustang. Emma was not present. She was with a school friend for the morning, an arrangement that Noah had made with the specific intention of keeping this particular event separate from his daughter's Saturday. Lucas ran the timing equipment. The conditions were straightforward. A standing quarter mile. 3 runs to control for variance. The Chiron would be driven by Evelyn's performance test driver, a man who had spent a decade inside the racing world and whose competence with the vehicle was not in question. The first run, the Mustang beat the Chiron by 0.6 of a second at the quarter-mile mark. This was a margin that in performance terms was not marginal. The Chiron's driver ran it again, certain he had lost a gear change. The second run, the Mustang beat the Chiron by 0.7. The third run, Noah drove with the particular unhurried quality he applied to most physical tasks, and the Mustang beat the Chiron by 0.5 seconds. Lucas printed the timing data and held it in his hands and looked at it with the expression of a man receiving confirmation of something he had believed for 3 days and had not let himself fully celebrate. Evelyn watched from the edge of the strip. The Mustang pulled back past her idling and stopped. Noah leaned out the window with the same unperforming calm he had worn since the night in Malibu. You built the thing that beat your best car, he said. I know, she said. For 11 years. In a garage. I know. He looked at the road ahead of him for a moment. I didn't build it to prove anything to you, he said. I built it because I understood what it was supposed to be, and I didn't want it to not exist. Evelyn looked at the car. At the faded blue of the bodywork, the honest rust at the rear corners, the clean geometry of a machine that had been built with a conviction that had nothing to do with the market it might enter. I believe you, she said. And then after a pause, that's the part that's taken me the longest to understand. That someone would do that. The shareholder meeting was not the kind of event Evelyn usually allowed to produce surprises. She was precise about agenda control, precise about attendance, precise about the order of information and the manner in which it arrived. She had spent a career understanding that the way a room is managed determines in large part what a room concludes. Damian Cross had been working the meeting for 2 weeks before it occurred. He had 3 institutional investors in conversation, 2 of whom had been introduced to him through Evelyn's own network, which was the kind of irony that strategic situations tended to produce. His thesis was straightforward. The company's most recent development cycle had produced inconsistent results because the core technology it was chasing was not reproducible. The Phoenix architecture remained theoretical. Without a genuine breakthrough, Vaughn Velocity's valuation rested on a story rather than a product. The board should consider whether the current leadership had demonstrated the capacity to deliver the real thing. The argument was not wrong. It was simply 11 days out of date. Evelyn opened the meeting with the technical documentation that Lucas had compiled from the test sessions, the performance data, the engineering schematics, the verification records from the Saturday timing runs. She presented it without announcement, without preamble, simply as the current state of the company's development position, which it was. She then introduced Noah Carter as a consulting technical partner, and she said his name with the specificity of someone reattaching a label that had been removed without authorization, which was also what she was doing. Damian looked at Noah across the boardroom table with an expression that went through several phases in rapid sequence and arrived at a stillness that was the nearest available approximation of composure. Mr. Carter, he said, I believe we met briefly in Malibu. We did, Noah said. You were the one with the Mustang. Still. Damien straightened his jacket with the gesture of a man reassembling his position. "And now you're a consulting partner," reinstated Evelyn said from the head of the table, "the original contributor to the Phoenix project. The documentation has been corrected." Lucas placed a folder in front of each board member. The folder contained the metadata recovery from the original filing, the notebook documentation from the working sessions, the timing records, and a letter from an independent engineering firm confirming the Tangent X architecture's viability and the accuracy of the performance claims. Damien looked at the folder. He did not open it. "You're saying," he said carefully, "that the technology is real, that it works." "It's been working for 11 years, Evelyn said, "in a garage in the valley. We simply didn't know where to look." The meeting lasted 2 hours and 10 minutes. Damien's proposal for a leadership review did not come to a vote because the 2 institutional investors he had been cultivating had read the folder and recalculated their positions before the agenda item could be raised. The 3rd investor, a woman who had been in the business long enough to recognize when a story had just changed its fundamental direction, asked a series of precise technical questions that Lucas and Noah answered with the fluency of people who had been living inside the answers for several weeks. Damien left the meeting before the final agenda item was reached. He did so quietly, which was the most dignity the situation permitted, and the room noted his absence, the way rooms note the departure of pressure fronts with a collective easement that nobody commented on directly. At the close of the meeting, one of the board members asked when commercial development of the Tangent X architecture would begin. Evelyn looked at Noah. Noah looked at the window where the city was doing its usual business outside, unconcerned with the interior proceedings. 6 months to a viable prototype, he said. 18 to a production candidate. He paused. "If it's done correctly, it'll be done correctly," Evelyn said. He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "It will." They left Malibu on a Thursday morning in early autumn, when the light on the coast road had the quality it gets in that season, low and gold and slightly nostalgic, as though the day is aware of what comes after it. Emma had been up since before 6, dressed and ready with a decisiveness that communicated her position on departure times. She had said goodbye to the house they had rented during the working period with the equanimity of a child who has moved enough to understand that places are not what you carry with you. She got into the Mustang with her bear and her school bag and the 3 library books she had accumulated over the stay, all of which she intended to return by mail because she had confirmed with the librarian that this was acceptable. Noah walked around the car before getting in the way. He always did not a check for damage, but a practice, a way of being present with the thing before putting it in motion. The car sat on the road the way it always had, with a solidity that was not about weight but about intention. 11 years of intention. He got in. He looked at Emma, who was already reading. He started the engine. Evelyn was standing at the edge of the property when they pulled out, which neither of them had arranged. She was in work clothes, holding a coffee, and she raised one hand as they passed. Not a wave exactly, something quieter than that. An acknowledgement. Emma looked up from her book and raised her hand back. Noah looked at Evelyn in the mirror as the Mustang moved onto the coast road, and she was still standing there, which was something he found he did not need to analyze. Some things carry their own meaning without requiring commentary. The road opened up south of the ridge, and the ocean appeared on the right, and the engine produced its sound, the sound that had filled a garage in Malibu on a November evening, and reordered the understanding of everyone present. The sound, that was not loud, but was complete, was composed of layers that arrived through the air, and through the road, and through the seat, and through the steering wheel. The sound of something built correctly from the beginning, for reasons that had nothing to do with what it might eventually be worth. Emma had stopped reading. She was looking at the water. "Are we going home?" she asked. "We're going home," Noah said. She nodded with the satisfaction of someone whose question has been answered precisely. She turned back to her book. The Mustang moved south along the coast, the October light falling across it without ceremony or comment, the way light falls on things that belong to the world and do not need to announce it. Behind them, the collected machines in the Malibu garage stood in their arranged precision, worth what they had always been worth, which was considerable and no longer the most important thing in the room. There are things that people build for money, and things that people build for reasons that money does not have a category for. The first kind tends to be visible immediately and understood quickly. The second kind tends to arrive in old cars on the wrong side of any reasonable expectation, carrying with them a quality that the visible and the quickly understood cannot produce, the quality of something that was made because it was true, and was kept because it was true, and will continue to be true regardless of what any room full of people decides to do about it. The engine ran on. Emma fell asleep somewhere past the first headland, turned toward the window in the posture of a child who trusts the road. Noah drove with both hands on the wheel, and for the first time in a very long time he was not thinking about anything that needed to be solved.